When one thinks what it truly means to be a Jedi Knight, things such as wisdom, courage, peacefulness, all of these come to mind. But few embodied these teachings better than Yoda, holding the position of Grandmaster of the Order for hundreds of years. In a way, Yoda would continue to hold that position even long after his death, as he remained in the hearts and minds of all of the Jedi that came after him. As his very last student, Luke would treasure everything that the Grandmaster had taught to him, passing each and every lesson on to his students. But how did Yoda's legacy grow after the next generation of Jedi Knights? They did not grow up knowing Yoda personally or knowing specifics about his life, but only the legacy taught to them by Master Skywalker. So what did the next generation of Jedi actually think about Yoda as a Jedi himself? And how did they feel about the Old Order? Well, join us today, my friends, as we explore this and dive into the minds and actions of the students of Luke Skywalker's Jedi Praxeum. When Luke began the Praxeum on Yavin IV, he had very little lore to go off of. All of the Jedi training had been the culmination of a few days with Obi-Wan and a few weeks with Yoda, and even a few years completely on his own, with no official Jedi Master. Dagobah had been a crash course on all of his Jedi training, and the fact that Luke progressed so quickly was only due to the wisdom of Yoda and the insane potential he inherited from his father. In the year 10 ABY, Luke Skywalker would come across a Jedi holocron that he learned had been stolen directly from Darth Sidious's personal collection. Within contained many stories of the ancient Jedi and a lot of knowledge that Luke desperately needed. But Luke would unfortunately only get a brief amount of time with the holocron before it was destroyed a year later by the spirit of Exar Kun. So, by and large, the only thing that he had to teach his students with were the words that were given to him by his own Jedi Masters. And Luke would cling to every one of their words, impart his students as if they were gospel. Yoda's teachings were essentially building the foundation of what Luke Skywalker would build the Jedi Order's philosophy on, with do or do not, there is no try, actually becoming an informal part of the new Jedi Code. In this way, Yoda became something as a mythical figure to the students of the Praxeum. Yoda was legend, one spoken of very frequently by their Jedi Grandmaster and Luke. Luke apparently even told the stories of Yoda so often and with such detail that the students were aware of Yoda's ideology, his mannerisms, and even his way of speaking. At one point, a young Jacen Solo would do a Yoda impression to amuse his friends, and during his younger years, he even gained the nickname of the New Yoda because of his pacifist nature. All of the Jedi felt a sort of vicarious familiarity with the old Grandmaster due to the repeated stories from their master in Skywalker, but this just goes to show the extent to which Luke saw the Grandmaster's legacy living on. But, as with all things in the Jedi, it was not always lighthearted amusement from the Jedi students. By and large, the Jedi held a significant reverence for Grandmaster Yoda, viewing him as something more than mortal. Anakin Solo, the youngest of the three Solo children, would at one point become plagued by visions of his grandfather, Anakin. The young Solo was so disturbed by his nightmares that he requested permission to take the sojourn to Dagobah. There, Solo would follow in the footsteps of the training of Luke, the exact same training that he received from Yoda under the Dark Side Cave. Anakin believed that this would be the only way to find clarity from his visions, and while on Dagobah, Anakin would locate what remained of Yoda's hut. Entering, Anakin had a profound experience, seeing how small the hut really was, knowing that it had once housed such power as the great Grandmaster. The entire ordeal taught him a lesson in humility, and gave Anakin the peace of spirit to move forward with his mission. The teachings of Yoda were held with deep conviction by new Jedi students. Many times, each one of Luke Skywalker's Jedi would echo the sentiment of how anger, fear, and aggression led to the dark side. Luke was diligent in teaching them to keep calm, to keep level-headed in any situation. This carries on what Yoda told Luke about how he will know the good from the bad when he is calm, and when he is passive. But the students simply didn't just obey the teachings of Yoda blindly. Rather, the Jedi Praxeum examined his words, turning them over time and time again, using them to progress to new levels. The perfect example of this was Sil Gall. She was a Mon Calamari Jedi and the niece of Admiral Akbar. During her early months of Jedi training, Luke explained to her that she had a natural talent for the Jedi healing abilities. Eventually, this would be put to the test when Mon Mothma was poisoned and in a state of rapid deterioration. Soon, she would die. Nanobots had invaded her body and were actively destroying and targeting her cells, to put her in a slow and a painful decline over the period of several weeks, to the point where she could no longer stand or speak on her own. There was no cure to this poison that was known, because it was comprised of nano-drones. Akbar finally brought Silgul to see if he could heal Mon Mothma though, and although Silgul knew that she had no formal training in medicine or the healing arts whatsoever, she did her best to assess Mothma's condition. Upon sensing each of the millions of nanites destroying her cells, Silgal racked her brain to think of how she could help. And that is when she remembered Yoda's insistence that size matters not. Yoda claimed that by moving a ship, it was no different than moving a pebble. She then thought about the possibility of turning that around on the reverse. She entered a deep trance-like state, with invisible fingers impossibly small, grabbing a single nano-destroyer, and threw it out of Mon Mothma's body. The Jedi then did this to another, and so on. It took her 9 hours of intense concentration, but Silgal managed to save Mothma's life, and to purge her entire body of the poison. Afterwards, she was exhausted beyond belief and would collapse, needing recovery and meditation. But the deed was now done, thanks to the direct teachings of Grandmaster Yoda. But now we get into some of my favorite lore. Luke Skywalker's own son Ben would go so far as to almost value Yoda's ways above Luke's. Particularly on the topic of attachment, Ben would side with Yoda. Ben observed the contrast between the non-attachment style of the old Jedi versus Luke's encouragement of attachment. And while Ben didn't make a decision on which one was ultimately better, he did see the pitfalls of attachment when his mother died. He of course was grief-stricken, but he would end up scolding his own father when Luke gave in to his grief and murdered Lumaya. In one of the most emotionally raw moments of the Grandmaster's life, the Jedi confronted the Dark Lady Lumaya not as a calm servant of the Force, but as a grieving husband that was driven completely by loss. Luke sought out Lumaya, long believing her responsible, and in a clash fueled more by vengeance than justice, Luke struck her down. But it wasn't just a battle, it was a moment of emotional collapse. Luke Skywalker had murdered Lumaya not out of dispassionate clarity, but with fire in his heart. For a fleeting, terrifying moment, he may not have been the Jedi Grandmaster, but a Skywalker consumed. Knowing this left a deep scar on Ben. He had always seen his father as the pinnacle of Jedi restraint and wisdom, but in Lumaya's execution, Ben saw something else entirely. He saw a man undone by attachment. It led him to question the very foundations of his family's legacy. Was Yoda correct after all? Was attachment, love, too dangerous for a Jedi to bear? And what was even more disturbing, if Luke could be dragged to the edge of the dark, what hope did any of the other Skywalkers have? Though Luke would later rise above his grief and recommit to the Jedi path, the damage was already done, and Ben's doubts lingered. His experience gave weight to Yoda's ancient warning, and placed him for a time on the opposite side of the generational Skywalker belief, faltering for a second and not seeing love as a pure strength. And in that quiet, painful moment, the lineage of heroes bore the burden of being all too human. For the students of Luke's academy though, Yoda was basically the grandfather of the Jedi. His life and teachings are timeless and embody everything that it meant to be a Jedi of this age. While they highly respected Master Luke and deferred to his teachings by default, they draw much inspiration from Yoda's memory. But of course, this was all encouraged. Luke is open about the fact that most of all of the ways are heavily based out of what he learned from Yoda and Obi-Wan. This is how he restructured the Jedi Order. He talks about their legacy so much that there is not a single student that didn't know their names or what they represented. The Jedi loved Yoda, respected him, and they used his teachings to become much stronger. So my friends, that was the legacy of Grandmaster Yoda, one that is much deserved. It's hard to accept that such a powerful and an influential Jedi sort of died in a swamp on some backwater world with only one person to witness it. But that just speaks to his greater humility. It feels right that Luke was able to have Yoda remembered in a way that he deserved. But as always, my friends, thank you so much for joining us here in the archives today. What are your thoughts on Yoda? And as a tough question, who do you think was the better Jedi Grandmaster? Yoda or Luke? And who do you ultimately side with in the lore in terms of attachments? Do you think that Yoda has a point? That attachments can lead even the strongest, most staunchly loyal Jedi down the path of the dark side, and vengeance, grief, regret? Or are you with Luke? And do you believe that no matter what, if a Jedi holds true to love, that will be their greatest strength and weapon against the dark? As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching. Force crush that subscribe button for more lore, and have a phenomenal day.